Kevin Gordon here from AutoSavant.com with your April 3rd edition of the Afternoon Commute. It's our 39th Afternoon Commute so far. Today I want to talk a little bit about racing simulators. And racing simulator, I guess, by definition, could really range quite a span of things these days. You get the PlayStation 3, Gran Turismo, and Xbox 360 Forza models of it, which can be with a joystick or a pedal and wheels, although in an Xbox it's getting trickier to get a pedal and wheels as a good setup. The realism of the racing simulators these days from a visual standpoint and even from a physics standpoint is really getting to be a lot better, proven by things like the GT Academy, which is a subset of Gran Turismo 3, where you go and compete online, and they're actually taking online racers and putting them in real race cars, and they're not completely out of place. The one big thing that's missing from them is any kind of gravity simulation about what should be happening to your body while you're actually driving. So you're on the brakes, you're pushing forward. As you're turning, you're being thrown into your seat, that kind of stuff. Well, the other thing that sort of limits their realism is the visual aspect to it. Even a giant flat screen is only so good because it's flat and, looking side to side. Sure, with Kinect, you can get some of the stuff that in theory looks as you turn your head, but it doesn't really work all that well, and I think most of the serious racers out there who race online probably skip it altogether because it probably winds up being more of a distraction than anything. Well, the reason I bring this up today is because of a new simulator that popped into the news yesterday. But before I get to that, I did want to talk a little bit about iRacing. It's one of those things I didn't know a ton about until I was talking to a friend of mine who said, him and his friends all have real racing seats, big force feedback steering wheels, and 3-pedal setups. You can get them with manual shifters. And you're connected to a computer that then you go race online, and it has a lot of the great tracks, and it's a big, I think there's 30,000 members online that actively race in a bunch of classes and categories. And it's a pretty interesting thing. Even professional racers go in there and use it to learn new tracks and pick up new techniques. But back to the simulators. So yesterday, a company called Motion Simulation released pictures and some specs about their new TL1 simulator. And the reason why this sort of hit all of the automotive news is because they designed it in partnership with Ariel, the makers of the Atom. And as you see in the picture scrolling by, it's not a little thing. What it actually is, if you look at it, is just a big 180-degree projection screen inside of a bubble, basically, that is done with rear projectors. That, without any gaming systems and without any other hardware, is 11,000 pounds, which translates, depending on current exchange rates, to 18 grand US. But the one thing that's still missing from that, because it does do a much better job from projecting the screen perspective, is any kind of body motion simulation. And when you get there, things get really crazy. I believe it's a company called Virtual GT that makes some simulators that have real 3-axis motion, and then you can go into the absolutely ludicrous levels where the Formula One teams have the simulators where you're sitting in your real cockpit, and those things can move in any direction to start to simulate what's happening in racing. Speaking of ludicrous amounts of money, does anybody remember the Nissan Juke-R? Nissan Juke-R was a Juke body structure that they transplanted a Nissan GT-R drivetrain, floor pan, suspension components, most of the dashboard into, as a bit of a publicity stunt. Well, it seems like the ultra-rich out there gave Nissan the indication that they'd really be interested in owning one, and as a result, Nissan is going to build to order the Nissan Juke-R as a road-going production-ish model for about $600,000 a piece. So it should be interesting to see who's the first person to pull one of those up to Cars and Coffee in the United States. My guess, Jay Leno. Kia has announced that they have officially launched the K9 in Europe. The K9 is their largest luxury sedan to date. They say it's an all-new platform, but let's face it, underneath is parts from the Hyundai Genesis and Equus. It basically splits the difference in size between those two, and they have announced that it will be for sale in the United States. The pictures scrolling by now are a mix of the prototype that did the auto show circuit and the production model in Europe. It's a pretty good looking thing. You know, I think it's going to be interesting to see how Kia and Hyundai manage the two different brands when they're now really sharing almost all of their platforms and building more and more similar models, across their entire lines. Do you know who's going to be 100 years old next year? Aston Martin. For their 100th anniversary, the CEO of Aston Martin has said they're going to build a all-new model to celebrate it, and it's not going to be a one-off car, you know, like the 77. It's supposed to be a full production Aston, expected to be powered by a V12, obviously share with the rest of their platforms. Should be interested to see what they come up with if it looks significantly different than the rest of the Aston lines. The pictures that are scrolling by now, I borrowed from Motor Authority, so thanks to them for those. And from the ridiculously expensive and generally unpractical onto the potentially practical. The picture that's going by now is the Ridgeline Cargo Saddlebag. And what that is basically a big car backpack. And what they've done is take the typical roof storage that you'd get and move it to the back of the car, and it straps on with big nylon straps and, you know, industrial level clips. It holds 16 cubic feet and up to about 100 pounds. And their big claim to fame is the fact that it's not up in the air where it's getting hit by bugs and rain and all those things, and also hurting fuel economy. By moving it to the back, it's in that void area behind the car. And finally for today, I wanted to talk a little bit about Formula One racing. My favorite form of motorsport still, despite all the wackiness, silly restrictions, and somewhat contrived racing that's been going on. And two things there. One, the 13th of this month is going to be the Spanish Grand Prix. I recommend watching it. It is a very interesting Formula One season. Multiple teams have won. There's a lot of competitive cars out there. There doesn't seem to be a runaway winner so far in the season yet. But two is to talk about how far the Formula One teams will go to gain an advantage. I mentioned that the racing this year is a bit contrived, and the reason I say that is Pirelli have given the Formula One teams a tire that degrades ridiculously quickly, and that's part of the reason why the racing's been so exciting. So it's being applauded in the fact that, you know, the racing's been more interesting as a result of these quickly degrading tires. I have a fundamental issue with that in the fact that I want my Formula One there to drive technologies, and all technologies, tire technologies, brake technology, engine technology, all of it as far as possible. But it is a bit hard to argue with competitive and interesting racing going on this season. Anyway, so those quickly degrading Pirelli tires degrade by shredding large amounts of rubber as they go around the track. Well, those pieces of rolled up rubber as they come off the tire are enormously hot, and if the drivers drive through them, they get kicked up and stick to the cars. Last year, a company called Zerkotech, who's a specialty coatings company out of Europe, came up with a coating that they could spray onto carbon fiber that allowed carbon fiber to deal with temperatures that were way above the melting point for the resins that they use to put the carbon fiber together, which allowed teams like Red Bull to use successfully those exhaust blown diffusers. And forgive me for getting so technical, but fundamentally they're using exhaust gases to create downforce. Well, that company, Zerkotech, has now come up with a similar coating that's extremely slippery. And what it does is, it's like a Teflon spray coating for the cars that keeps that rolled up rubber from sticking to the cars. And at this point, they've signed up 10 of the 12 teams to spray their undercarriage parts and all the rest of the parts that could be exposed to rolled up rubber so that they don't stick to them. And it's not a weight issue. It's the aerodynamic components of a modern Formula One car are so finicky that a bunch of stuck-on rubber on some of the parts would disrupt their expected airflow and start to degrade from performance. So just an interesting little insight into, the lengths that the Formula One teams will go to in order to be as competitive as humanly possible. Also on that subject, and to slightly contradict myself from a moment ago, it is another good example of Formula One pushing automotive technologies into the forefront and making them, one of those things that'll trickle down is there's a need, a company comes up to solve it, comes up with a manufacturing process, and as that gets to be more popular, it may actually trickle down to cars. So there you go, the afternoon commute for May 3rd. I'm Kevin Gordon, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon.